Well, I know.
What did they say it's gonna cost?
They said he
1 to 2.
poor guy, just like this all the time. He's a good guy.
That's what I would have thought. Yeah.
Just ask him. Yeah, yeah.
The guy who lived across the street from your dad was sold real estate. Ed? Is he still around?
Rain.
I see him.
Well, it's rain.
Maybe you heard it before COVID.
Yeah.
Didn't know that, huh?
And again, that's just, you'd rather be over than under.
Hey, Ross,
We're
we're gonna call the meeting to
the
order.
guys in here for the development, so
It's not,
they must have some too.
What's your seat?
this is where I sit.
Is that your board seat too?
Yeah.
Oh, that's appropriate.
There's everybody.
Yeah, did pretty good, pretty slick.
What is it?
Moving, it's like a
Like
collaborative.
I can, click on different, like,
We're good?
yes, and then
All right,
comments.
we're gonna
Send the comments to you.
We're going to call the meeting to order. This is the Tyrone Township Planning Commission Workshop Meeting, June 16th, 2021. It is 6:03 p.m. Please rise and join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, before we approve the agenda, I'm going to suggest we reorder it a little bit. Wilson, the applicant for Lake Urban Crossing, is going to be late, so let's put him at number 2. We'll talk about accessory structure standards until he gets here, then we'll hear him out and then get back to accessory structure standards. So do we have a motion to approve the modified agenda?
So moved.
Support. Motion and support, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. That being said, we are on to our discussion about accessory structures. Zach, our planner, is on his way. I'm sure he's stuck in traffic somewhere, like everybody right now. At our joint meeting with the board, I have some notes about our discussion on accessory structure standards. We didn't type them up or anything, so I've got them handwritten here. What I'd like to do tonight is take 1 or 2 of these issues, talk about it, and then hand it over to Ross to start making the changes final. Then bring back to us in the future. So my notes on accessory structure standards that we got from the board. Number 1, it says here, remove the planning commission requirement for 1,200 square feet. So in LK1, R1, and R2 lots, a landowner or homeowner can build an accessory structure, a pole barn, up to 800 square feet and up to 1,200 square feet with planning commission approval. I know we've all talked about this, but just to refresh everybody. We've never denied a request to build a 1,200 square foot pole barn in at least 5 years. Our thinking and the board's thinking is to just remove that requirement for those particular lots. Here, I'll bring it up here on the screen here. So in R1 and R2 districts, and this also applies to LK1, so if we move down here, it says a detached accessory structure may not occupy more than 40% of any non-required rear yard, provided that no case.
That's not the right.
Is that not the right one? Okay.
That's for attached.
Oh, you're right. Sorry. Let's see, can
I
you?
have the text in there.
Yeah, in this one? What section are we looking for?
I'm looking towards the end of the, not the document, but it's, yeah, continue down. There it is, building size limitation.
That's the one. That's the one I had.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's attached.
detached accessory structure may not occupy more than 40%
So
of the.
that's still not continued.
Oh, okay.
Percent, that's a lot. That's a lot I heard. This is 25%.
It's gonna be modification of requirements or something.
Okay. Hi, Zach, welcome. We are talking about accessory structures right now. So our applicant for Lake Urban is running late as well, and so we're kind of talking accessory structures, and we're going to come back to, we're going to get back to the agenda when Wilson gets here. So what I was looking for is the section in our ordinance where applicants in LK1, R1, and R2 are limited to 800 square foot pole barns but may build up to 1,200 square foot with planning commission approval. So the goal here, and what the board more or less instructed us to do, is remove that planning commission approval requirement.
It's the highlighted portion on the bottom of page 11.
Page 11, right?
It starts, right there. Yep.
Right here, okay. The planning commission may approve the following modifications for R1, R2, or LK1. Here it is, letter B. An increase in permitted building floor area up to a maximum of 1,200 square feet, subject to compliance with the percent lot coverage and placement of standards in Article 20 Schedule of Regulations. So basically, we can just remove letter B there, right?
If that is the intent, right now, it's pretty much based on the joint meeting, the consensus of the board that based on the current times, it may be appropriate to allow up to 1,200, being as the structures will still need to comply with the other requirements, the setback requirements, lot coverage, and all those other things. There, as an ordinance amendment, there would need to be public hearings and things held on it, so there's a chance that we may still want to have some kind of a process or change the numbers. I mean, I believe warrants a little bit of discussion just to make sure that what we're coming up with is what everyone feels to be appropriate for our community.
Well, here's where I might defer to Zach a little bit and see what we're doing around the world with this kind of requirement. Do you see anything else like this elsewhere?
There are, well, it depends on the community. There's some that are very nervous about having large accessory buildings in certain zones, especially in front yards. One example I can say was Dexter Township. I'm intimately familiar with there. It was 1,000 square feet. And it's a weird number because you don't get pole barn packages that come out to 1,000 square feet. So they're always having to modify that. In general, if you've got these things, it appears that you've been approving it, so folks are comfortable with it. You should probably just make it something that can be done. And I think the 1,200 square feet ties in pretty nicely with a lot of sizes that the pole barn packages come in.
Yeah. So that'd be like 30 by 40?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and still the same architectural standards would apply, so when you say whole barn, if it is an actual whole barn, it would need to meet the residential design requirements for the zoning district, which traditionally when these come to the planning commission, they've required that they be painted to match the house. Usually the orientation of the siding doesn't make a difference as long as it looks residential as a structure, be it the design of the roof, the pitch, windows, there being a man door facing the front of the road as opposed to, two garage doors in some instances, depending on the site. A lot of those things, at least under our current ordinance, unless those are modified, would still apply.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not an agricultural building that would be permitted.
So how does that stuff get sussed out in like a 800 square foot barn or 600 square foot structure?
How do the standards get applied?
Yeah, you do them, right?
Yeah,
It's all
it's just,
done.
it's
Okay.
only in those specific zoning districts are higher density, single-family residential districts where those standards do apply. But yeah, if it's under 800 square foot, that's administratively reviewed.
Well, I asked that question because you mentioned sometimes the planning commission will require painted the same color as the house, so is it, can you catch those kinds of things? in
Yeah,
your
I
review?
mean,
And
we
you can-
require in those
you can-
districts that they provide those details at the very least.
Okay.
That it will be designed to match the house or something along
Or
those lines.
substantially similar,
Yeah.
something like that. Okay, and what do we think of 1,200 square feet?
I think that's a standard that's used by a lot of people. I mean, you know, that's a good size.
That's a good size structure.
Especially in a, you know, residential area, so.
I wouldn't want to see it any bigger, personally.
Well, we did 2 last summer on Bennett Lake Road, and they're both up now. And you can see them, they're substantial, but I don't think they're gaudy or.
You could always go to ZBA, right? If you wanted to go bigger.
I don't think you'd find
Also,
it very.
So that's it.
I think potentially you could, technically. We don't ever see it because we do have this allowance to go up to 1,200, which is generally sufficient, especially, you know, in most cases. I think that you could apply for it under our ordinance as a dimensional variance. We just can't grant use variances.
Well, and in a residential area to begin with, you don't want to make the pole barn larger than the house, you know, within reason. I mean, if rural, that's a whole different issue, but the you know, the subdivisions and that kind of, and especially on the lakes, you're trying to have whatever somebody is building fit in with, you know, the rest of the buildings within, you know, sightline, whatever you want to call it.
I think one of the biggest reasons why we don't see these type of appeals at the ZBA is because it's really difficult to meet the criteria to be eligible for one. I mean, justifying based on the set criteria for building anything.
How do you, so since it applies to LK1 as well, what's a front yard, what's a rear yard, how does that get figured in?
The setback requirements, they would all still need to be met.
Which is the front? Is the front yard facing the lake?
If it is a lakefront
Is it
LK1
lakefront?
property, then it's considered the roadside,
The roadside is the rear yard,
is the front
is
yard.
the front yard?
Yep.
Okay, didn't we have one go into the front yard in LK1 recently?
That is where they are permitted on lake lots. in LK1.
They are permitted there? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
They just need to
That
make
makes
the
sense.
minimum setback.
Roadside.
Yeah, it's a totally different dynamic.
Yeah, it's interesting, because some lakes, the front yard faces the lake, not in this township, but my cottage up north, the front yard faces the lake.
There's Lake Huron, yeah.
I think it's plenty, but from my opinion, 1,200 is
1,200 is pretty big.
big enough. I wouldn't want to see it any bigger.
Yeah, and these are in residential. And so if you've got a couple acres, you've got a different set of standards. If you're an RE, FR,
Yeah, when you get into FR, RE, different standards.
well, what else should we, what else is applicable here, in your opinion?
So I'm gathering that the general consensus at this time, as far as kind of modifying or changing these requirements, is just eliminate the planning commission review requirements and allow it to be handled administratively. And that's basically the gist of it. You don't want to talk about changing, well, Steve mentioned that 1,200 square foot is a large number. That should be, it's pretty substantial. If everyone agrees that that size would be appropriate, do we want to keep the height increase in there? Are there any other considerations for that? This process also allows for a height increase up to 2 feet. So,
Oh, up to 2 feet higher
yes.
To be higher than,
Than what is permitted in the district, which in those districts, I think it's all 20 feet, measured from the average grade to the average between the peak and the eaves, depending on the style of roof.
And if it's a barn style.
Then there's a measurement calculation in the definition section.
And again, that ever get denied, does that come up as much? Well, it
Not generally.
kind of goes hand in hand though with the larger.
Yeah, but my point being, since this is a special process that would allow for an increase over what is right now permitted in the zoning district, I think that's something that needs to be considered.
Yeah.
That's one thing I'm not in favor of. Because, like, remember we had the one that we talked about, I think it was over on Taylor Lake, where they were concerned about just how big it was and how close it was to the property line? You know, you start getting a building that's 20 feet tall at the mean, you know, you could be 26, 26.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a big structure, especially if it's 1,200 square feet, and that's gonna big, yeah. I don't see a reason for, you know.
So leave that 2 foot.
Yeah, leave that as a.
Leave that as a, it's just right here,
Don't change
it's
it.
another, that's letter A here, so it says,
Increase of up to 2 feet in height of a detached structure, so that's still planning commission approval.
Then that's fine, as long as.
So the only thing we're proposing to do is put the size of the structure from 800 to 1,200, and then delete item B, which allows the planning commission to.
so wherever, yeah, I think that's pretty.
Let me just make sure I'm on the same page here. So you do want to allow there to be a process for the planning commission to consider an increase in height of
Yes.
that aspect alone. And then everything else, as far as up to 1,200 square feet, could be administratively approved. It's only if they wanted the height increase that they would follow this same procedure as it's prescribed, more or less.
Well, I
Does that
guess,
make sense?
you know, the question I would be asking here is, in situations where someone is building the 1,200 square foot size, and they're using a barn-style pole barn, are we then requiring them, if it's 2 feet taller, to get planning commission approval?
That's what I'm hearing.
Have you got a lot of those?
Not so much height as floor area. That's primarily what we get the applications for.
Because the loft is what what you run into with the height issue.
Again, going back to the one that we discussed,
Tyrone Lake.
yeah, I think we came up with a good solution of, our leverage was to move it back parallel and in line with the other
Yeah.
structures.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so they had a little further walkout to it, but, I think overall it was a better solution for the surrounding neighbors.
Well, he would
And that
want-
gave us the leverage, that's why I like to keep that in the,
gives us a chance to look at these once in a while. Yeah, and
and if the neighbors come in and say something, then we can take that into consideration.
a 2 foot height increase in mean height is more than a 2 foot building height increase.
4 feet.
4 feet, yeah. That's big, that's big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some quick math just to get your mind around. So if you've got a 30-foot wide pole barn, 15 feet from the walls to the center, if you have 10-foot walls at a 6/12 pitch, which is on the steeper side for many pole barns, that's 17 and a half feet to the top of the peak.
Okay. And that's to the top, so
Yeah,
that's
that
definitely
would be
allowable.
well under the-
That's still come out 13 and change.
Which is probably why you don't get too much of this, because
Yeah.
you'd have to either, or, you know, if you want to make it architecturally, if you got a house with a steep pitch, that might come into play there.
The last one I would recall was a gambrel style, like the barn style.
Yeah. That was on Bennett Lake Road, as I recall.
That was on a.
Oh, the last one where you got a height.
It was at the end of a cul-de-sac.
Okay.
So that everyone feel like that's appropriate? Keep the same procedure for the height increase, keeping that at 2 feet, which in reality is 4 feet. But removing the 1,200 square foot and basically changing the maximum accessory structure size and the other, in LK1, R1, R2 to 1,200.
Okay. Is there anything else that ties into that we need to discuss that we might not be thinking of?
I guess the question that I have, and Ross, maybe you can answer this one, is this is a piecemeal fix for this particular situation. Is the intention then that we're going to basically then rewrite the rest of the ordinance to make the modification, the other modifications that are necessary, but this one is a money saver to people who are interested in providing or having a pole barn go up, and this way they don't have to come to the planning commission, they can simply take care of the process through you.
Yeah, I mean, it would expedite the time frame.
Right.
And, I mean, the fee is not a whole lot, it's basically just to cover the cost of a public hearing, so. And primarily time, I think, would be the biggest thing. It would allow for, I don't know, more people to build. It's not everybody that wants to do a 1,200 square foot.
Right,
structure,
that's a big,
but they do come up, and there
Big
are
build.
people that, you know, have specific needs that.
so is the rest of the intent then for the rest of the ordinance to do that as a whole, as opposed to just making some patchwork?
I think,
Oh, yeah.
we're gonna discuss these in bite size.
Right.
And then Ross can have a chance to work on them and, you know, delegate whatever he wants to Zach. And then make those changes. We'll take the whole ordinance change though as one package. Everything accessory structure related, we'll take to the board.
Most of these are all gonna be in Article 21.
Yeah.
You know, there may be a few bits and pieces elsewhere that, you know, we can make sure that we touch on before we send the batch over, but I think, when we previously discussed it, the intent is discuss each topic. I'll kind of try to work on it, piece by piece, and then we'll look at the big picture, hold public hearing, go
Right.
through the rest of the process.
Right.
We'll get to questions in a little while.
Didn't know if you were there.
Not yet. No, we're still working. Okay, so 1,200 square feet. Ross, you're good, right?
Yep.
Need anything else?
I believe that covers that portion of it.
Great. Okay. My next note, it says lots larger than 2 acres, larger structures on larger lots. So I think that might have something, that might be to do with these same zoning districts. Oh, okay.
Just making sure.
I'm trying to remember what was said there in regards to that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I have a note about lots larger than 2 acres.
So I assume that that's referring to the FR and RE. There's different standards for the number of accessory structures based on acreage.
Right.
Under 2 acres in FR, RE, you are permitted 1 detached accessory structure. Size is not limited. It is still, it obviously needs to comply with lot coverage and setbacks. But they are restricted to 1 if they are under 2 acres.
Under 2 acres, 1, including a detached garage.
Correct. It could be a detached garage, it could be something else. They are permitted just 1 detached, whether it be 150 square feet or it is 800 square feet.
And then one under 100 square feet, and 1
Yeah,
additional
they're permitted 1 incidental.
incidental.
What's the size allowed on that?
They're in FRRE, under 2 acres, there's not a size
Not a size,
limitation.
okay, it's
But
just
they
setback.
are still required to meet setbacks
Strictly.
and lot coverage.
So in FRRE, on a 1.5 acre lot, you could put a 5,000 square foot barn if you could. make it work.
Potentially, I mean, if
Okay.
everything, yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah, so when we're talking about a number, there's also, so that's one example. Under 2 acres, you're restricted to number of accessory structures to 1. There's also that limitation in R1, R2, LK1, the higher density residential districts. The biggest issue that has come up over the years are primarily lake lots, Lake Tyrone, and/or in some cases Runyon Lake, but primarily the development pattern around Lake Tyrone. There's a number of these very, very long, somewhat narrow lots that could potentially accommodate additional structures.
Mhm.
And that's another issue where a variance really isn't the best way to go because it's very difficult to meet the decision criteria to be considered for. A lot of the time, these structures, in some cases, won't be seen at all. Not from the public right of way or whatever, just because they're over 1,000 feet long, some of these lots. And there are a number that exist, existing non-conforming around some of the lakes that have multiple structures, no issue. It just makes their neighbors want to have an additional structure. And there's not really a procedure to do that. My personal opinion on it is, do we want to necessarily allow multiple detached structures in those higher density districts in all circumstances? Probably not. That could potentially lead to some issues, but that might be something better handled on a case-by-case type basis. You know,
Do we have a way to handle it through our ordinance?
you know, this is just my opinion. Maybe for something like that that is very specific to the particular lot, whether it be the configuration of the lot, maybe it could be handled through a process similar to the increase in accessory structure size, where we basically have a process to ensure that it's going to be compatible with the neighborhood that's above and beyond administrative review. That would also allow input from the public in that process, which, you know, I believe would have the potential to be a little bit more controversial than the increase to 1,200.
And you're referring to adding additional accessories?
Correct.
Over the one?
Yes, so just an example here, 1,200 foot long lake lot, whether it be 40 feet wide or 60 feet wide or what have you. Long driveway coming up from the road, more times than not, house is set back way by the lake. They have a lot of available space, and especially living on a lake, if you have the lot for it, you have toys.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just the reality of it. That's what people frequently ask about. You know, how can I accomplish this? And right now, with our ordinance, short of seeking a variance, there's really nothing. So there is demand for it. I wouldn't say there's overwhelming demand where, you know, it's something that that really needs to be administrative. But I think it's something that, to be fair to everyone, we should at least have a mechanism in the ordinance to allow people to apply for it.
Well, it seems like it could go in this modification of requirements section somewhere.
My opinion is, I mean, that process, it has the potential to work. The reality is with 1,200 square foot, it got treated more or less like a rubber stamp after a while.
Yeah.
With this one, I think the configuration of the lot is really everything. Visibility, I mean, we can put that under the broad statement, neighborhood compatibility.
Sure.
So are you looking at that to come to the planning commission then, or?
That's my opinion on it, just because I'm a little bit hesitant to just say, this will work everywhere without problems. You know, I'm thinking of a small half acre, 3/4 of an acre lot in a subdivision. Somebody wants to put up 2 800 square foot structures, then you start losing that neighborhood compatibility. So that's just my thought on it. I don't know if you have any opinions.
So, I don't want to make zoning ordinance more complex than it is already. Less complex is generally better, but when you get simple, sometimes you lose some of the detail. So there could be an absolute right now, you're in this Lakes District, you get one accessory building, end of story.
Pretty much how it is right now.
Yep. On the other end is you could write very fine code language to provide guidance, so it could be done administratively. Now that is tough to kind of beta test it and break it, to get to that point where it's smooth and clean and understandable and it makes sense. Requesting variances is very difficult for accessory buildings. With the practical difficulty, like you can still use this lot without a variance for a second garage. And my personal opinion is I want to keep to the ZBA just variances that have some meat and potatoes to them, because it keeps the ZBA looking close at its criteria as opposed to, these standards are dumb, we want to approve it. So it keeps the ZBA well-trained. One potential, there are a lot of places in the zoning ordinance where there are opportunities for waivers. And back in the day, there was something that was a bit more popular called performance zoning. And it's kind of looking more directly at the impact of what you're doing. So the maximum light you can put out is this, but if your lights are far away from the property line, you can put out more. So it's not necessarily the rigid here, it's more wiggly. The reason that came out of favor is it's really difficult to administer. You have to look at a lot of things. So here's where I was pointing to, and this isn't necessarily for here, but kind of to keep in the back of your mind for future things where you kind of, here's the base, but we can see cases where we would allow something else and it would be fine, but it's not necessarily good for variance. Something I call administrative adjustments. So it's not exactly a variance, but it's a recognition that in some cases, based on the conditions, we can adjust what's there. The name isn't really important. You already have these kind of processes scattered about here or there. So one potential thing is you look through this and through other sections, there are a lot of places with waivers, you can just say, you can request an administrative adjustment, and then you kind of create general review criteria, not exactly like variances, but kind of general ones. And then instead of having that half a page of text every time where you have a waiver process, you can just point them to that section. Again, that's kind of a long ways off, but I did want to plant the seed. You're kind of doing that now intermittently, and I would say having this waiver process is a great way to test to see what works. So you've done that with the 1,200 square feet, and it's basically come back that, yeah, we're okay with it in 99% of the cases.
Well, that's what I'm thinking here too. We started here, just like we did with the size increase, and years down the road, if we find, well, this is a rubber stamp, then we've shifted to Ross.
Yeah, and that's a great way, is to have it with that discretionary, you get some practical experience, and then you can codify it to that, so you can pull it out, so there's more predictability and less time once you've got that real world experience.
I think that's reasonable, and wouldn't you say that this is the right place to put this particular waiver?
Yep.
It's a little different than the size increase though, because what zoning districts are we really talking about here, Ross? All of them, right?
Well, when it deals with the number of accessory structures, I would say, in my opinion, R1, R2, LK1, the higher density ones. When we're looking at the other issue, which we kind of introduced the topic with, RE, FR lots under 2 acres, we might want to look at that one separately, just because the conditions, the development patterns are totally different.
Totally different, sure. Well, I guess, if we're looking at R1, R2, okay, so these 3 districts.
Which are the districts right now that people can apply for the size increase?
The size increase, but as far as a number increase, I don't think it's a district thing as much as lot size. Right?
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily hurt, it wouldn't apply to some of the other zoning districts.
Right. Right, but on FR and RE, which are generally a bigger, you get away with a lot more on those, generally speaking.
Does that come up often that people want to put 2 accessory structures in the LK or the R1 or R2?
Like I mentioned, it depends on, it's primarily around some of the lakes that are developed with very long, narrow lots where it's not going to really impact anyone visually or would be a very minimal impact. I'm sure that there are other properties that would fall into that category that would be applicable, but that's the first example that would jump into my head.
Does it come up once or twice a year, or?
The number?
Yeah.
More than that.
It does, okay.
And
I haven't
basically
seen
the
one
answer,
yet.
well, we haven't, because the answer right now is no.
There's nothing in the ordinance that.
There's not.
Ross kills that before it even
Gets to us.
gets to us, yeah. Because there's no,
My opinion is 1,200 square feet, if you can't make it, I mean, that, to me, seems like plenty. You know, if I had, on my lake up north, I wouldn't want someone putting two 800 square foot structures on it. I just, you know,
yeah. Well, I think, that's why I think, looking at it more for the FRRE stuff, lots under 2 acres, that's, but again, Lake Tyrone has those 2,000 foot long lots.
And a lot of those arguments you hear, I go back to the lake example, is because they have boats and things like that. What do people do with boats? They either have to store them outside or they rent space elsewhere if they don't have the space on their own property. So a lot of people would prefer, obviously, to store all of their watercraft, other recreational vehicles, side-by-sides on their premises if possible. And, you know, most people will choose, well, they'll have to rent a storage unit or something to protect their belongings from the elements, theft, anything like that. Those are the biggest reasons that I've heard.
I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, I think that's appropriate for this particular situation.
Okay, so the issues are, do we want to allow or allow or develop a path to allow more than one garage pole barn on lots under 2 acres and or lots in around lakes and in neighborhoods and stuff like that?
Those situations where they're limited to one detached structure.
So not just FR and RE.
No. Also LK1, R1, R2, but if there were to be a formal process like this that takes all of these, whatever criteria is set into consideration, there's no guarantee of approval. It's something that someone could apply for, and if the planning commission finds that it's just totally not compatible, there's no way around it, then it gets denied.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking like I live on Bennett Lake Road, but right down the street is Balfour and all that. Those are, I couldn't imagine 2 big pole barns in the backyard there.
No, and it's very neighborhood specific. It depends on the patterns of development. You know, some other examples, thinking Lake Tyrone, there are a number of properties, probably 6 plus, that are existing non-conforming with multiple accessory structures, which you really can't see.
Right.
You know, that's not to say that there aren't situations where it could potentially impact people, but that was my thought to why we should make it more of a case-by-case, special circumstances type process as opposed to an administrative process that could be, you know, neighbors could take offense.
I like the idea of being able to do it here, because,
Well,
again,
we don't know
can.
what we're going to get into.
There's other things to consider too. I mean, you can say multiple structures, but you limit the second accessory structure to a certain size. I mean, there's ways that you can modify it. I'm not saying that that's a good idea, that might overly complicate things, but if that's a big concern, that's something that could be done. Say you are permitted 1 up to X size, and if approved for an additional structure, it can be X.
Yeah, your primary accessory structure would be is up to 1,200, and your second one
is 8 or whatever the number might be. I don't know if you wanted to go in that direction, that could be an option. I don't know.
I would shy away from that particular restriction myself, but I don't think it's unreasonable. Zach, what do you know?
Well, so I'm going to ask, what potential negative impact are you trying to manage or lessen? Is it bulk of accessory structures? Is it clutter of having a bunch of them? So whichever one is most important will kind of affect the approach you have. If it's clutter, you want to have fewer buildings generally.
Yes.
If it's mass, then you could say you have 1,200 square feet, however many buildings you want, or up to so many buildings. So in that case, the mass impact is going to be less because smaller buildings tend to not be as tall from geometry. but you're gonna have more of them scattered about. So there are, depending on what you think is most important, there are different approaches. And I've seen communities, I worked in a lake community, they had the same clutter concern where they said, you get one, if you're in these areas, that's it. You can have a gazebo and maybe 100 square foot garden shed extra, that's it. And the nature of the place there is if you had too many, it would become clustered and bulky and just not work as well. I've also seen communities where they'll say you get up to so many square feet of accessory buildings. And how many you do, you gotta sort that out.
Interesting. It's a lot to think, a lot to consider. So it's kind of clutter versus bulk.
Right, because with the clutter issue, you still have, you limit the buildings, they park stuff outside, okay? Whether it's a motor home, a boat, that kind of stuff, so. But clutter is probably the biggest issue that you have to deal with, because you have one person who's not cluttered and somebody else's yard looks like, you know, they're waiting for garage sales to start.
Right.
On that note, most of the complaints that we receive are outdoor storage related.
Like he left his boat out.
Yeah, he has too many vehicles and things like that. You know, a lot of the time, those folks that we have to enforce that may like to have an additional or a larger accessory structure so that they are able to store their belongings and protect them.
And quit giving
And in a lot of circumstances, the answer is no, get rid of it.
Interesting. John, you got anything?
So if we have this waiver process, is that gonna take a public hearing?
If that's what you would like to do, we could keep
You know,
it basically
I'm
the
not
same.
saying that you would, but we would need to put that in there.
If, my opinion, if the intent is to consider neighborhood compatibility, then it definitely wouldn't hurt.
Definitely would,
Well,
I think a public hearing.
That public hearing process is where we notify the resident, certain amount of residents.
All properties within
Yeah.
300 feet, and then also.
I think that's
publication
important.
In the
Yeah.
newspaper.
I agree with that, absolutely.
You know,
So, yeah, basically, we're taking out the size increase requirement here in this place. We're gonna maybe try and fit in a number of buildings increase. Going through the same process as increasing. Right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways. I'm just thinking about the best way to do it. We could, I guess I need to play around with it and see, you know, obviously bring it back and
Yeah, why don't you,
just put together a rough framework. So,
Yeah, and then-
so we want to kind of keep the same general framework for PC review and public hearing for the height increase as well as potential for multiple structures. We want to eliminate the 1,200 square foot, modify R1, R2, LK1 to allow for that as a administratively permissible size
Yep.
via just land use permit application. And I think that covers it so far.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good amount of work on accessory structures for one night. I know Wilson's not here yet, but
Call upon them?
I was gonna, well, first I was gonna see what Scott, kind of questions or comments Scott had, and then we can go through Zach's review of the updated parallel plan. Steve, you weren't here last week,
No.
so we'll give you we'll get you, do the whole rundown for you, but, Scott, you had a question?
Yeah, I got a couple answered, but, so we're gonna go up to 1,200 square feet administratively, more or less. So I always thought it was a good idea a long time ago anyway. We're not gonna go through all the Billy Hell and pay all these fees just to put a shed up. But I think 1,200 square feet is a lot. Okay, and I know there's a big question about sight lines now. According, I live on a little motor lake, and you know, I don't want something blocking my view either. Okay, so that's important. So I would probably be up to Ross to determine, you know, if the sightlines would be affected, but like I said, I think 1,200 is a little much, you know, for smaller lots. I think, you know, for sure, you already said that you're up to about 2 acres, you guys are going to go through you guys, you said?
No, so what, 1,200 square feet is the maximum allowable accessory structure size on R1, R2, or
And
LK1 district.
So,
And then there's also other requirements that have to be met, including the building envelope, so where you can build it, that's setback requirements, so they can't encroach on the side or front or rear yards. And then,
how much percentage of the property was that?
do you know offhand?
Offhand, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 25.
That's, I thought you said 40.
25% of required rear yard?
No, we're talking about lot coverage. It's in the
Lot
table of
size.
schedule of regulations, which is.
Not counting the attached garage, everyone's counting.
It
So
varies
that's-
by district. I believe it's a little bit higher in LK1 than it is in R1 and R2.
Yeah, like I said, the lots are small. We got pretty good sized lots on my lake, but some of these lakes are pretty small.
Sure.
But,
Well, then, as far as sightlines, that's a different issue.
Oh, yeah. Well, I know that issue's coming up. I know
Yeah, we're gonna
it's-
look at that. That's different. That more involves your primary structure, the
Yeah,
home,
yeah.
not. And it also will apply to, or it does apply to accessory structures, but it's everything. So that's a different
Now, we'll,
issue.
if we go to a 2-story barn, will the second story be added into square footage?
Building height.
Just building height, so do you guys,
If
if you got 1,200 on, you got
Right now, it's
1,200
just-
on the floor, 1,200 up on top.
Yeah, right now it's just regulated by floor area.
Building.
First floor.
Yeah, first floor area. But with the height restrictions, it's really difficult to get a full second story at any accessory structure.
Yeah, I'm just saying, well, they can go to the ZBA to try to get approval, but, you know, it's.
So they'll be able to come to us and try to get a higher structure, so up to, effectively a 4-foot higher structure. But no, the 1,200 square foot limit is building footprint.
So that would require a public hearing.
That would require.
All of these will. Right now, we're just at a stage where we'll start putting together drafts.
You know, I like the idea of just coming to see you. Say, this is what I'm gonna do, get my setbacks, and give you my plan, and then say, hey, go ahead, Scott. I don't want to go wrong, But I mean, that's fair.
In a lot of circumstances, that's probably appropriate, but
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
need to
I understand.
Yeah, anything else?
I don't know.
All right, why don't we get into the other thing here. So you're good, Ross, you got your,
Yeah, I've got something to start on as far as those 2.5, 3 items. I mean, if we wanted to talk about more, we could.
I think in the interest of time and effectiveness, we'll go into the next agenda item. I know, like I said, I know Wilson's not here, but Steve, you'll want to get up to speed on this, so we have some time to talk about it. Let me download Zach's review here. I didn't get it until too late. Zach's review. Is this it? Great. Okay. All right, is this the one, Zach, here, June 16th?
Yep.
So this is it. You want to kind of go through this again, but you can give us a little bit more of an abridged version of
Yep.
the rest. That might be Wilson here.
So this focuses primarily on the parallel plan, And for those in the public who aren't familiar, as part of a planned unit development, one of the processes
One
is...
sec. We're just now talking about your plan.
Are you-
We just started right as the bell rang, as you walked in.
So one of the introductory processes as part of planned unit development is creation of a parallel plan. Parallel plan shows how the property could be developed under the base zoning. But base zoning is a bit tricky thing. We'll get back to that. But the idea is this is kind of the base number of lots that you could have to start with. And where that's...
Without any special approvals or...
Just walk in the door, we meet the standards, approve it.
Of the current zoning, without PUD, without anything, so.
But that's not current zoning, that's future land use, right?
Yep, and I'll touch on that a little bit. We found another spot of bother between the zoning ordinance and the master plan. And it also serves as the basis for additional lots if certain things are done as the planned unit development. So it's kind of a core element of planned unit developments. It is potential for the planning commission to waive it if they're not asking for additional lots or those types of things, but they are, so we have to have it here. You see the parallel plan up there. One thing I'm going to mention at the beginning is that the lots themselves, as far as square footage, they can include wetlands and water areas. That's not prohibited, but the lot has to be considered feasible for building purposes. So there's actual language in your zoning ordinance that says if there's really steep slopes and you're not putting a house on there, then that lot doesn't count, or if the entire lot is underwater, you're not going to put a houseboat out there. So keep that in your mind. They can include those areas, and this looks much more like a parallel plan than the previous one that still had the common spaces. Common spaces are required for basic site condominiums. So a couple things we'll touch on is...
Sorry, is Wilson coming?
He's supposed to be landing right now somewhere, and Lino's supposed to be picking him up, and headed here, they're supposed to be here by 7 o'clock.
Okay.
So, yeah, they're supposed to be here by 7 o'clock.
Well, I'll try to vamp a little bit then. So I mentioned the spot of bother between the zoning ordinance and the master plan. So the parallel plan is supposed to be based on the zoning district that's consistent with the future land use map for that area. And what you see depends on if you look at the master plan or at the zoning ordinance. In the master plan, it says that the area, I'll call it the southeasterly portion, the south side of the lake, should be, okay, let me see. In the master plan, it says it should be rural estate, correct?
Yeah.
When you look in the zoning ordinance, table 11-1, it says the corresponding zoning district is FR. And ideally, they would be saying the same things. What I had been taught in planning school is that conflicts happen. You look to the more specific to control a general. So if you say you can have 2,000 square foot accessory buildings, but then you have language in Lake that says the largest you can have is 1,000, the more specific controls, or the most recent controls. And in this case, it's not legal counsel, but my interpretation would be the zoning ordinance is adopted law, and it speaks very specifically to PUD, so it probably would be considered controlling versus what the master plan says, which is a policy planning document. So that's where we're at. If you look through the developmental standards, the lots in the northwestern portion are consistent with the developmental standards for the lot area and the width. In fact, many of them are larger than the 21,780 square feet that's required.
And you're referring to this, what we'll call phase 1, right?
Yep. I'll switch to the phase stuff now. Phase 2, the parallel plan is based on what the master plan said on the RE zoning, not on the FR, which the zoning ordinance says it should be. So those lots are generally smaller. I'm gonna let that sink in a little bit. So according to the zoning ordinance, they should be consistent with FR zoning, which requires 3 acre minimum, 300 feet width, and these don't meet that.
For this parcel, you're saying?
For the lots in what we're calling phase 2,
Based on the current zoning?
based on the FR zone, which table 11-1 says,
But this is RE, right?
Yeah, it's
Oh, I see what
It's
you're
based on
saying.
future land.
So it's,
Was it future land use?
Yeah, so you have
Yes.
this wavy
Is it
line.
RE or FR?
That's where there's.
future land use shows.
Future
FR.
land use shows the FR, correct.
Future is
For some reason.
Current is-
Right now, it's
Current zoning are RE.
And you
and
say that we got, on the parallel plan, we should follow the future land use, not the current zoning?
that's what your zoning ordinance
Does
says.
it say we should, must, shall, could,
It says
would,
the parallel plan shall be based on
shall be?
shall. It's not discretionary. So I'll let that sink in. There's going to be lots of questions, I'm sure. I'm going to back up to, if you look at the page that shows the future land use map, it's that kind of wavy line with yellow on the left is either the R1 or the R2 consistent zoning district.
That, well, yeah, that's FR for some reason.
This right here?
That doesn't make
Residential
sense, that
commercial
would be
residential.
FR in the future.
I can't tell you that zoning makes sense. I'm just
Well,
giving
no,
you some what it
you
says.
look at what's around it, and there's nothing FR
There's nothing
even close to.
farming about any of this
No.
area. Well, so.
That
Yeah.
is what it is.
We're gonna try and get over that though,
Yeah.
somehow.
So one thing for discussion tonight is the boundary line between the denser residential and the less dense basically runs due north from that little nub on the southern side. It splits the property, it splits the site, which isn't clean. You'd prefer it to encapsulate an entire site, but it happens. The parallel plan has been prepared with that boundary, instead of going straight up where it is, bowing over to follow the border of the lake. So that is a bit of a deviation. It is very common, though, to use geographic features, natural features like lakes, rivers, or ridges to set the boundaries. So part of the planning commission discussion should be, are we consistent with saying we're okay with the line going there for the parallel plan purposes? Do we want to touch on the discrepancy in the zoning right now, or should I run through it again? Or run through the rest of the materials?
Touch on the discrepancy in the zoning, I think we're,
Yes.
Okay.
so we're talking the discrepancy between, the master plan, future land use map, and the current
Zoning.
zoning. And the problem is, I just want to redefine it just so I'm totally clear. The problem is, the parallel site plan was based on current zoning.
Nope,
No,
nope.
that's why I'm going through.
Yeah, it is bizarre, and it is unusual for, I can't think of another community offhand that says, look to the master plan.
Yeah.
It's very forward-looking, and the idea is that what you're developing today is more consistent with what you want in the future versus what's here right now.
Yes.
So that's kind of nice. Currently, it is zoned RE, the entire parcel, but the future land use map designates the one portion for the medium density and the other side for the preservation.
Okay.
And master plans have a table or language that says, for this area designation, here's the most consistent zoning district. It's required by state law. You have to say this area is kind of these zoning districts, because you want to have that idea. Very rarely is it a very clean description or tie-in where you use the same names in both. So, in this case, in the master plan, it says the most compatible zoning district with the designation for the right-hand side for phase 2 is RE. That's what the master plan says.
So,
For the right-hand side,
For
so
phase 2.
this part right here, from this line over, it says what now? Repeat that for me.
The master plan says the most appropriate zoning district for the future land use map in that area is RE.
RE. But this part,
Is, so phase 1 is R1 or R2?
R1 or R2, what about this area right here?
That's also RE, according to the master plan.
According to
no, in the
that.
master plan, we don't call it RE and all that.
No.
We use different terms. And
Yes.
that's where I'm getting a little bit confused. In this case, it's residential/natural resources preservation.
Yes.
You're equating that to
So
RE.
there's an equivalency table
Where
in
is
the
it?
master plan.
I need it.
Page 130,
No,
something like that.
Real quick, on that, on your table, or on your report, it says, 3 acres per dwelling unit for residential/natural resources preservation. Is that what you have in there? But in this table, I see it's 2 to 3 acres in the master plan.
I told you it's a spot of bother where they're not playing well together. So where it gets even more complicated is when you go to table 11-1, which is in the PUD article, it says the equivalent zoning district is something different for phase 2. That's where it says it's the FR, the 3 acres stuff.
Yeah. Where, see, I don't see the FR. Again, well, we don't know, but it's not called FR, it's called this
Yes,
residential.
it's not called
It's
FR.
not called
There's
that.
a
So,
equivalency.
I don't think, when we're talking about FR, that's not even in this
In
equation
the
at all.
zoning ordinance it is.
But not for this property.
There's also an equivalency table in the zoning ordinance.
But I mean,
That's
neither
where
of the
it's counted.
current zoning or future land use has FR on anywhere on this parcel.
Not on the future land use map, but that's why there's the equivalency tables to
Or
equate it
or
to
not
the
on the
existing
zoning,
zoning.
not on the current zoning. Right?
One more time.
This parcel, the subject parcel, does not have FR neither on the zoning map or the future land use map. Or its equivalent.
Well, the future land use map, it does have the equivalent of FR based on the zoning ordinance equivalency table.
That's what, yeah, so
Yes.
that's.
Not on the master
Okay.
plan.
I thought FR would equate to agriculture.
Yeah, me too.
So that table.
You got it?
That's what you would.
I got a map.
Yeah,
We got the
so-
map.
We
got
have,
it.
thank
You got
you.
them?
Yeah, we do have.
With the
it.
equivalency, so you can look at it.
Yeah.
real quick.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Yeah, so we have 2 equivalency tables, one in the master plan, one in the zoning ordinance, and they say different things.
Okay, yeah, the table you gave me from the future, from the master plan, that table looks correct, where agricultural/residential equates to FR.
One could argue that that was what the intent was to be, but.
Where's the table that's wrong?
There's a disconnect between that table in the master plan and the table that actually made it into the zoning ordinance.
So this table on page 114 is not the one we're using?
As Zach mentioned, typically we go with the zoning ordinance over the master plan in most circumstances because the zoning ordinance is
Then move back to
an enforceable.
RE.
Well, we're to FR.
Uh,
That's what
I don't
it-
see it that way.
Ross, where in the zoning ordinance is this equivalency table?
It's in the PU, it's in Article 11.
It's table 11-1. It's near the front. And so we can,
Oh,
Yeah, so it, I mean, it is.
Yeah, that's wrong.
It is what it is. Well, they might be thinking natural resources preservation
It
requirements.
doesn't equal the future land use map. And
Right.
saying that all, the future land use map for all of this area here is FR, that's a lot
It's
of,
inconsistent with what's out there now.
yeah.
and either it was missed, or for PUD, there was a thought to have it be this different way. I don't know, we need a DeLorean with flux capacitor to sort that out. And we can touch on ways to get that sorted out. There could be a zoning map amendment, or a zoning text amendment to that table, to make the table consistent with what the master plan does. And there are some other spots in the zoning ordinance where there's some weird stuff with the future land use map. But I think there's some that aren't even listed there as having equivalents, which is a challenge.
Zach, one question, does this plan, if we use RE, you reviewed it as FR.
Correct.
If we go to RE, does it work?
I haven't done that review because I went it based on what the zoning ordinance was pointing me to, but I can, when this is discussed again, I can have more information on that. So I think that's settled it a little bit. I know there's going to be more questions, and the applicants, if I were their shoes, I would be very cranky about this. It's like riding your bike on the sidewalk, you look around and all of a sudden the tree smacks you upside the head. So I understand it's not pleasant.
Hang on one second, don't you think this should be reviewed under RE?
Yeah, I do.
I do. I totally.
Whether we think it should be or not, may not be, we gotta review it based on what the ordinance is.
We need to dig into that further.
But it seems that it's
Yeah, I understand,
inconsistent.
that's what I think.
It seems like,
That's
yeah,
how it should.
I mean, to me, that this is an issue that.
That's the current zoning.
You could argue that it's not
And
clear.
you see a lot of the parallel plans, a lot of ordinances have parallel plans that use the current.
Yours deviated. So the way to fix it is it's not discretionary. The zoning ordinance says it shall be based on the equivalencies. Look at table 11-1. 11-1 shoots us off into the thick grass off the fairway. The fix for that is a zoning text amendment to that table to say, we want it to actually be this zoning district. We want it to be RE equivalent.
That sounds pretty involved.
Amendment,
Yeah.
if it was strictly that table, I mean, if there's a process, we need to go through public hearing, it would need to go through county review, and the board will ultimately approve or deny. But, I mean, the prep work on it, if that's the intent, if that's the recommendation of the planning commission, the review would obviously be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and so that's the easiest path to get from here to there at this time. And this body, you're not going to be making decisions tonight because it's a workshop, but you can direct staff to bring that zoning text amendment for an upcoming meeting.
Well, let's put it on the table, but let's go through the rest of the review.
All right. So a couple of other things is to look at the feasibility of the development. Where are we at down there? So there's our plan. Mentioned in the natural features, there are a lot of lots that have significant wetland areas on it. As I mentioned, it doesn't need to have the entire lot area, the minimum lot area is dry land, just you need to be comfortable that it could be a buildable, usable site. So there are a number of those listed there where you ought to look at them. If you're not sure, you can request additional information from the applicant, like show us a 2,000 square foot house footprint on there. How rigorous you look at it is up to your comfort level. We have the setbacks there, and that table is based on what I mentioned, looking at the zoning ordinance where it's pointing us. You see phase 1, it all meets. Phase 2, because zoning ordinance says FR, and they prepared it for RE based on the master plan, it doesn't right now. It would be difficult to see massage room to get it to meet without cutting out a bunch of lots. So again, there's the option for the text amendment there. What's next? Our access and circulation. So the roads, even though they're not physically drawn in, the right-of-ways, they're not dimensioned, but they appear appropriate. There looks to be, just from the eyeball test, an ability to put roads in, to put cul-de-sacs, to put sidewalks. So that appears appropriate. If there's any discomfort or concern with that, this body can ask the township engineer, fire chief, Livingston County Commission to offer an opinion. Again, my quick eyeball test is they look like you could generally fit roads up to your standards within the area where they show it. For essential services, there is room for right-of-way to go in there, for essential services to go within the right-of-way. My understanding is there are available taps for the number of lots they show in the parallel plan. One thing that I'm going to bring out well, two things for essential services is that there is an existing sanitary sewer along the northern lot line, and that comes with an easement. It wasn't entirely clear how wide the easement is, but there were those 2 lots up there that may make it a challenge for buildable capacity on there. And similar to the wetlands, you can include that as part of your lot area, but you still need to be comfortable that it's a feasible building lot. So if you're not certain, you could ask, show the building footprint on there. The other one is the plan does not have areas specifically, the parallel plan does not have areas specifically designated for stormwater management. Now, again, this is the test that you need to figure out whether or not the plan is feasible. You don't need to have the calculations for how big the thing would be or where all the pipes would be or that. You have to just be comfortable that the site could be constructed as shown. Previously, in PUD plans that had been prepared, the idea was to use the wetlands as part of the stormwater management system. That could certainly be done here. You can have swales and kind of first flush catch basins within the rights of way. So I don't want anyone to think that you need to have a giant pit, retention pond or detention pond there. Just you need to be comfortable that this could probably hold the stormwater that it generates. Next up I think is landscaping. There's no landscaping shown on the parallel plan, but it does appear likely that there's space along the southern border because those lots are so big to put in any required landscaping, so that's not really a concern. For the parallel plan review, we touched on most of these already. You guys basically, at the end of the day, need to be satisfied that this parallel plan could be built. Not every I or T, but have a reasonable belief that it could be built. The big questions, actually, you can scroll down to the last one there. That's got the highlights there. And I forget which order I put them in, so forgive me. So part of your conversation is going to be, are you comfortable with the future land use area going to the side and following the lake as opposed to going pretty much straight up?
Following this natural feature of the peninsula.
No.
Or this,
This up here.
sure.
So these lots.
Yeah, I got you, instead of going here.
Yeah, so if it were to go straight up, the lots on the eastern side of that loop would be too small.
Yeah.
Again, I'm comfortable with it following the natural features. It's very common practice, and future land use maps sometimes are very fuzzy and drawn with a big brush. And in fact, if you'll recall, the Piro area has overlapping bits, so that's not uncommon. Part of your discussion will be if there are any lots you're concerned about not being buildable, is to let the applicant know so that they can either make adjustments or demonstrate to your satisfaction that it could be buildable. And then the big thing is either the phase 2 has to be amended to meet the standards of the zoning ordinance of the FR, or a zoning text amendment could be initiated. And thank you for your patience with how late it came in. It was very fast turnaround.
Thank you for turning it around so fast.
Yeah, hot off the press.
All right. So, number 1, that would be the zoning text amendment. So we would need to amend, I don't have it on my computer, the one table in the zoning ordinance that says, thank you, you pull that up, that equates,
11-1?
Yep.
yeah, at 11.1. Instead of FR for residential and natural resources preservation, it should say RE, is what we would be.
Yeah.
And that would solve,
Ross, do you believe that's what should have been the intent, that's an error? Or do you know, I mean?
I just don't know for certain. You know, if the intent is to initiate an amendment, we would need to have a public hearing, which we
Yeah.
could potentially schedule when it's discussed, because it is very straightforward. And, I mean, it would be one change, but we would obviously need to follow procedure and get public input on it. I mean, we could look back and try to research, you know, various meeting minutes, any notes that may exist from previous master plan visioning sessions, things of that nature.
But this is in the PUD, right?
I'm sorry?
This is in the zoning boards, in the PUD.
Correct, it is in the
Article 11.
zoning ordinance in Article 11.
So what I'd also recommend, if there's a text amendment just for that we run through and see that there aren't any other weird deviations. Or if there are, we say we meant to do this, instead of, how did this happen?
Is there anyone at the township with any history on that? Like, when was the PUD, when was the PUD ordinance adopted?
Probably round about 97.
but
Potentially,
the question is, was this table included originally, or did this get added in when we did our master plan?
that's something that I could likely find the answer to.
Two
You should
gentlemen
at
from
least
the
have
township
records of when the amendments
that
occurred.
did your job, they would know.
Mark, probably.
Mark, what's his name?
Going back to that,
One before Mark.
I wanted to see if we could find actual records, you know,
That would be
some
good.
kind of.
We're just hearing from people wouldn't do it. We need something written.
Thanks for the zoning map. I think this one's out of date. It's old. And I do think that the one on the website is.
This is.
That's the one on the
Oh,
website that I
future.
downloaded today.
I know, I
If
just,
it's wrong, it's wrong.
I think it is.
That's
Oh,
future
okay.
land use right there.
That's
So
future.
That's map A, but in the zoning ordinance, or in the master plan, it's on map 10, the date of 11/15/12. That's got a whole bunch of different zoning changes. Look at all that along the highway. I mean, it's wrong. It's right from the website. I just opened it too. It says draft right on there. It's 5 years previous.
Which one is that? So,
Like if you go to the, go to departments, go to
The map.
planning and zoning, then it's over to the right, says future land use map.
That's the
Under
one,
form-
is that
under
what
form-
this is?
It brings up the draft.
Oh, I see. So
Now,
where
to bring up the correct one, go to the master plan, and it's on page,
Right, I have that one too.
yeah,
okay,
so that one
137.
will say a date of,
11/15/2012.
and this one is a 2007 date.
Okay, but that one says residential natural resource.
They both have the same,
For that parcel there.
land use categories, but, you know, in this, specific parcel, it looks the same.
Yeah.
But like all along the highway, some of this, blue with the blue, the planned services and all that, it's a lot different.
yeah, I'll point that out and make sure we get that corrected.
You got any thoughts on,
And which direction we want to drive?
Yeah, and I usually do too, but I see it said, when you had it up, I see it said draft right on it. With map
so what do
A.
you think, should we modify?
I'm looking at surrounding uses
For one
around this parcel,
application.
just the density, and then the future land use. If you look at that, some of this, you know, there would be, this FR actually has a, if you look at this, if you go scroll down, I mean, these are actually larger parcels down here that.
It's like opposite.
Yeah, it is, it's almost like it's flipped. I mean, it's just, to me, you know, haven't been on the board for 8 months, that's just the way it looks to me as far as what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and then look at the current zoning map, pretty much the south half of the township is FR. And it's like opposite almost.
Well, regardless of what it should be or what makes sense, we're kind of stuck with this right now. And
We should have a new one next year.
yeah, we'll have a new future land use map next year, but
That isn't gonna help us right
that is not gonna help us right now. And what, you know, our opinions of the future land use map we probably all agree that it's not valid, unfortunately. So that being said, I guess the question is, what direction do we want to go? Do we want to say, sorry, this parallel plan is not valid because it is not following the ordinance to the letter? Or we want to direct Ross to bring to us a zoning text amendment? It'll slow the whole approval process down.
I think based on the future land use categories and where was it at in the?
So that's table,
Where was the table that showed the equivalent?
11-1.
Oh, that's in the zoning ordinance.
Yes.
That's the table. that's wrong.
Oh, that's the table that's wrong.
Isn't there a table in the master plan that has equivalency?
Yep,
Yeah, that's what I want to look at.
it's page 114 or 130.
130, so,
Yeah. There's the one.
Oh,
114, okay.
might be numbered differently than the PDF. Where is it on page number?
114, 148, only two.
Oh, 83, so you gotta go way
Scroll
up.
down a little bit.
Okay,
So based on this, which I don't know.
I see what you're saying.
This was adopted in 2012. We reviewed it and agreed on it years later, Ross, the master plan. Or the date on it is 2012.
The date on the master plan, the future land use map, yes, 2000.
So we had a table that had these comparisons showing that the residential natural resources preservation corresponding zoning district is RE.
In the master plan.
I'm gonna pull that up.
Yes.
And DI extractive industry. But that's in the zoning ordinance, and that took place after potentially.
We'll need to verify when it actually was in
Yeah.
the zoning ordinance. I need to verify that.
And so that's kind of a primer, when you do stuff in the master plan, that's a really good time to shake your zoning ordinance hard to make sure they match and make changes for consistency.
Well, when I see this, I'm trying to pull it up on the screen here.
Based on the current zoning, and I see it's equivalent to RE, but that's,
I do too.
I think we should amend the zoning ordinance.
Do
That's
the,
my
yeah,
opinion.
yeah, zoning text amendment, I agree. Just in the PUD, because in the master plan, it's
I think
consistent.
What page is that on PDF? 148.
Almost to the end.
So here it is. Here's what we're looking at up here. This is in our master plan, comparison of future land use classifications and zoning districts. So the subject parcel, according to the future land use map, shows residential natural resources preservation, which this table clearly clearly equates that to rural estate. Now, that being said, our zoning ordinance shows FR as being the equivalent.
Not the zoning ordinance, the
The
PUD.
PUD.
Which is in the zoning
It's
ordinance.
part of the zoning ordinance.
Yeah. I don't, is there any other tables that show the,
But are we supposed to review this in light of the future master plan, or in light of the master plan, right?
The
So it
future
seems to me
land
if that's
use
the case, then this chart should be the one that should control, not the one.
But, and I believe it specifically says the future land use map, that portion of the master plan.
in accordance with table 11.1? Well,
And so,
So Dan, your question was, should we do the zoning text amendment? And I agree with John that we should.
You got any opinions?
Well, you know, right now, you're stuck with following the ordinance.
Mhm.
The ordinance is the law.
So we can't approve the parallel
The
plan
parallel plan.
as presented, because it does not follow this right here. Residential natural resources corresponding zoning districts, FR. So the only way to make that parallel plan work is for a zoning text amendment. Those two letters change from FR to RE.
I would think so.
I will say.
Setting aside, though, the parallel plan, that issue,
Okay, so in the,
do we make this zoning text amendment based on the discrepancy here? Because this is a major discrepancy. You can
Yeah,
see this is the same table, just in a different place.
Yeah.
One says one thing, one says the other.
But if push comes to shove, you still have to go back to the
We
ordinance.
still have to go back to the order. Well, in which case, so as it relates to the application,
Right.
it's going to delay the application, period, if we have to make this
Well,
ordinance, this zoning text.
I could add that although it would be cleanest to have the zoning text amendment done and then process the application, the applicant could submit it and it could be reviewed with the understanding that it's only good if this zoning text amendment is adopted.
See if it works or not.
Yes, so like, we're requesting this, and it is a risk from the applicant, but the reward is you cut months off your time. And so you can approve it with conditions, the township board can approve with conditions, so you could approve with the condition that this is only effective if this zoning text amendment becomes effective.
Ross, or Zach, can you show me the section in the Article 11 where it talks about that we're using the future land use map and not the, I thought it says, the parallel plan shall comply with requirements for a site plan and shall show how the site could be reasonably developed in compliance with adopted zoning and subdivision ordinances and standards.
Go to parallel.
That's what we're at.
The parent plan should be drawn to contain the maximum number of lots or dwelling units allowable and reasonable for the dimensional and other ordinance standards and practical engineering limitations that would apply to the site if zoned in accordance with the site's future land use designation. Okay, so to me it said adopted, in the previous sentence it said adopted.
But now you're getting into the gray area. If it's future land use, then this
Does it say map or
this one comes
future land
in,
use?
that's in the future land use.
But then it goes on to say, look at table 11-1.
That, you know, I'll tell you right now that if you got an attorney in on this, they would rip this thing apart in court in 2 seconds, because it's so inconsistent. Not that I want to see that, but that's,
If it was
there's.
if it was current zoning, they wouldn't be able to use this west half. That would be all I read.
And so actually, the reason why you would base it on the future land use map is you're actually trying to make it easier for the applicant. Because usually,
And I think that's the way it should be, because that's what we're looking forward to. That's how, that's the master plan for the community.
Yep.
And I think we have the equivalency table wrong.
I think I think this was a mistake. I do. I think that's a mistake right
Mhm.
there.
I'd like to see the applicant resubmit it with it as an RE and see what we get. Because otherwise, it's not going to work. the way this is.
when it comes back through, I'll change the table and put the note that
Yeah.
the
Subject to-
flashing lights. Yep.
Yeah,
The point here tonight is to give our applicant an idea of whether or not he has a path to approval, basically.
So we're trying to get to the number. So how many number, this is 79?
Yeah.
That's what you got. Last time it was 62, right? Or,
The time
No,
before,
that's-
yeah, when we used open space and we didn't use the whole thing as a whole, we still had
you
common.
adjusted it.
Yes,
Okay, but now we're at 79.
correct.
And then, and then the desired plan.
Desired plan was 93.
93.
Yes, correct.
So what,
This is when we get into allowances.
And we had 5% bonus for the sanitary, I think 5% bonus for the wetlands, and using the wetlands as stormwater ditch basins.
And the sewer.
Oh, the sewer was number one, and then wetlands, and then architectural standards.
Yes.
And-
Very,
And then the sidewalks was another one, as far as I was.
sidewalks and the cherry on top, yeah.
Is there a formula for how much each of those are worth?
yeah,
5%.
there's.
Up to 5.
But we
Up
get
to
a
5.
we get a
Percent
design,
or 5 what?
5%.
5%.
So
of the base
there's a
plan.
max each.
Yes,
Figure it out, Jack.
But it is up to a maximum of what?
15%.
15% total.
So I think that's,
So what does that give us? 79 times 1.1.
91, 90.85.
5.85.
and then you,
Close. That's with giving them everything.
yeah, that's a big, yeah.
Well, what do you think? Do you want to proceed under the specter of maybe not having that text amendment go through, or do you want to just do phase one?
The question becomes,
Can we just do phase one?
if I look at the borough plan that's based on the future land use in the PUD to help the applicant, I almost feel that there was a mistake that's done, unintentional, that's penalizing me, and then I'm thinking, if I'm gonna do the borough plan for the future use, it's kind of contradictory. And that's why if you look at the hills of Tyrone, that's already built, as I think in R1,
Yes,
R2.
R1 and R2.
It's contradictory now to the zoning, if you're gonna adopt it, half of hills of Tyrone that's existing cannot be built. It's not like you can tell the people, leave the houses, so I think the question becomes, this is not to be done to appease me. You know, the mistake, in my opinion, needs to be done because that's the proper thing. And again, I don't know the methodology, and I'm not here that, get involved in what you guys do. I just feel that way. I mean, that would be, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I guess, again, what you're saying kind of goes back to what we have is one thing, and what we think it should be is another thing.
Sure.
What we want it to be might be another thing altogether, but what we have is what we have.
That's correct. And so
So-
the bottom line, I mean, if that thing's not gonna go with that amendment, with the text amendment, then I'll just do phase one. Just do phase one and just leave the rest. And then it'll be way different for me, and I'll sit on it.
Or you can start later, wait for the text amendment, or
So when do we proceed with phase one?
What is the process of the text amendment, Ross? How long would something like that take?
So there would need to be a minimum of one public hearing.
Specifically for that, Ross, or the deep injunction was something that's part of the public
You
hearing.
could have multiple public hearings in the same meeting, but it would
Okay.
be specifically for that item,
Sure.
at least that item.
Well, you know-
we could have that done next regular meeting.
yeah.
It's 2 weeks' time, right?
So for something like this, I would need to submit it, make sure that it is published in the paper within at least 15 days prior to the meeting. So I think.
Yeah, I think you have time.
Time-wise.
Oh, you have time, for
we'd be
sure,
able to
yeah.
get that published.
To get it to the paper. For both. Well, no, I'm sorry. We're not ready to have a public hearing on your site plan yet.
I mean, that's fine, like what you're saying, I mean, we'll just do phase one, yeah.
I'll just proceed with phase one, we all agree as far as that goes.
It is possible to amend a PUD. It is trickier though, because there's already artifacts on the ground and you have to re-examine things. If it were me, I would continue with the application with the understanding the township is working on the zoning text amendment. Everyone here says, yeah, we think it ought to be this other way. The only thing would be, it wouldn't receive final approval until that text amendment is effective. But they can run parallel, you don't have to wait for it to be effective. And as a practical matter, after it's approved, you're gonna have to do mobilization, right? So even if they're approved at the same time, it takes a little while for the zoning text amendment to become effective. It really wouldn't delay you significantly.
To keep going forward with the whole thing, realistically.
Yep,
Based on
with
the
that
assumption that
condition.
the text amendment will happen.
Yep, if it were, I'm working for the township, but if it were me,
Yeah.
that's what I would recommend.
Okay.
It does mean there's more language in the reports that are read and probably more explanations, because people are like, wait a minute here.
Right.
But it's very common to have a lot of conditions on approvals, especially for PUDs. In fact, Putnam Township, where I also provide work for them, way on the far side of the county, they had a fella come in with a planned unit development for 990 acres. The Girl Scout camp that they decided they didn't need anymore. And he said, we want to do this PUD for equestrian. They love horses in Putnam Township. You have no idea how much they love horses. And so that requires bigger lots and areas for trails and a common space. And everyone's like, we love this plan. We looked at the zoning ordinance language for the PUD and like, you can't do that. You have to, zoning ordinance says you have to have 50% open space. And that doesn't pencil out at all. So the township said, we like what you want. We've never had an opportunity to stress test our standards. We're going to write new stuff, and you can start the application process. It is a bit more risky, but everyone has it. So you won't be the first person in the world to do it parallel with the text amendment. This is what I would aim towards.
But, you know, the whole process here is we want to try to make things work, and we can't do it until we get that text amendment out, technically.
Yep, it can't be finalized.
Right.
Final.
But conditional?
Yeah, so likewise, site condominiums have to have master deed and bylaws and those types of things. Those are almost never completed at final site plan review by planning commission or township boards, because if there are any changes to the site plan, you have to change portions of the master deed. So you can almost wake a planner up in the middle of the night, and the site condominium plan, there's going to be a condition that the master deed has to be approved by the township attorney, the planner, the engineer. So conditional things are okay.
Okay.
And again, this still has to have a public hearing, so that whole process has to be gone through yet, too.
Yep.
What do you think?
But it has to work within our system. That's
Oh,
what I
absolutely.
mean when I say we want to make it work. It needs to be legal, it needs to be done properly, the Ts have to be crossed. We have to do the basic work, because it's just like painting a car. If you don't do the work on the front end, you're not going to get a good paint job.
Yep. And as Mr. Nicholson pointed out, there are processes for the zoning map amendment. It has to be published in the newspaper 15 minutes before, or not 15 minutes before, 15 days before the meeting. That's known and established. You know when you have to get it into the paper, when you have to do that. What the notice requires is pretty well understood. The process is first there's a public hearing here, and then it goes to the township board, and they're the ones who can adopt it or not adopt it, or adopt it with changes. And generally zoning amendments are effective 7 days after, but you can make it longer if you want. And you guys do 2 readings or just 1 reading at the township board? One? Okay. There are some townships where you have to read any ordinance twice, which adds a whole bunch of time. There
I
is,
mean, 2 different meetings,
yes,
not just like twice in a row.
yep. After a text amendment goes through here, as was mentioned again, just for everyone, so we kind of have a sense, It does go to the Livingston County Planning Commission for their review and recommendations. Now, it's good to have that planning body because they kind of look at the big picture stuff. But they make recommendations to the township board, and the township board can follow or not follow.
Just like us.
Yep.
Right. And this is really, it's correcting an error that's in our,
That's my view.
like our ordinance
Well, yes,
and master plan, because they reference each other, and that
Mhm.
that needs to be corrected.
Inconsistency.
Is it worth bringing that up at the next township board, just to see that everyone's on the same page with that before?
I think once we get it to them,
Yeah.
I think we'll be fine and we'll,
I think, basically, it's gotta be explained to them as to
Yeah.
what the issues are.
we'll bring it to them
Yeah.
and lay it out. And, separate from the application we're dealing with.
Yeah, this
This
would need to
mistake
be
we found.
corrected regardless of whether the application was made or not,
Yeah.
It just, we happened to find it because
Because of an
we
application.
were touching it.
because of an application, yes.
So there hasn't been any PUDs that,
There is that one PUD,
oh,
Irish Hills, which was 2001.
It's been that long, really?
so they prepared a parallel plan?
We have one PUD.
That was 2001. I don't know the full history. I have a lot of data. There's a big file with a lot of correspondence, so there's likely that the answer to that somewhere, but I don't have it.
Okay, so Russ, you're gonna prepare for us a zoning text amendment for our July regular meeting.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not really anything to prepare, but
Right.
I can set the public hearing.
Set the public hearing, you can get it done. All right.
So that just gets us to the parallel plan approved. You're still gonna
Gets
review it and whatnot.
gets us to where this is
But not-
valid. Yeah.
But we still gotta work through the rest of the preliminary site plan.
Right.
Right, oh yeah.
And we're not doing that today. Today was just parallel plan.
Correct.
Today was kind of giving the applicant an idea of whether or not he has a chance, right?
To kind of continue with our project,
Kind of
realistically, the way we kind of got it laid out, I guess.
I think there's a path forward for you, if you choose to take it. Or you may choose to scale back to phase one, it is up to you. Either way, I think the zoning text amendment will need to happen.
Right, that's regardless, so if he stays with phase one, we still need to make
We still need to make
adjustment.
that, yeah.
Yes, because it
That's what I
doesn't
was
make,
saying, it's
yeah.
not done for me, it was done to correct an error. And again, we're not going to make
Right.
it basically, that's to be done another way.
Yeah.
I would say perhaps the next most useful conversation or direction you could get, you're not making a decision tonight, but the direction is if there are any lots that you're skeptical of, whether or not they can be feasible,
Yeah.
to,
About 65 looks,
Is that this one?
the big one, yeah.
I do have questions about that lot.
I mean, it's a huge lot, so I can't really,
The land area in the building envelope might be too small for us.
Yeah,
well, I think there's a total of 14 lots that were brought up that's identified as potential.
Potential
and,
issues.
and again, it was a quick, dirty review. The scale of this, it's hard to judge.
Right.
So for most of those, probably the easiest way is to plot the generic building.
put down square house with a garage on the side of it or something.
yeah, because you look at some of these lots and they look like, well, there's hardly any buildable area, but then you see it's a 5-acre lot,
Mhm.
so.
That includes the water and sewer.
Yeah, but, yeah.
And realistically, some of these people could pull DEQ permits, and again, you're allowed up to a third of an acre without having given anything back. So, I mean, there's potential of that too.
Right, but
Oh, Phil.
you don't want to have somebody's sump pump running 24 hours a
No, I
day.
agree.
But Zach, wouldn't the change to F, or to RE, make that front setback, change that, which would make these potentially, or not?
No, because this plan was prepared as if it were already.
Oh, this was perfect.
Yes,
Okay, yeah, because look, there's some that are 2 acres. It needs to be 3 minimum.
For FR,
Yep.
not RE.
1.75 for the RV,
Right.
So the setback on this plan is
50 feet from.
Consistent with RE.
RE. Got it. Okay, thank you.
So for the lots that Zach identified, I'd like to see a generic building footprint overlaid.
So do we know the specific ones?
Yeah,
He
they
did.
identified.
It's in
So,
there.
Yeah,
just
there's
got an
14
updated
on the
review
list
this
right
today that I haven't had a chance to send over yet, so I'll send that.
Oh, sure,
I
yeah,
did
sorry.
it last night.
Read it.
And I can give you a hard copy as well, here tonight, if you would take a look at it, we have an extra.
So it's lots 2, 3, 20, that,
Yep,
Right.
that group.
that's fine, and I can show houses on them.
So with the public hearing, what else can we do? So you're suggesting that we still proceed with the preliminary site approval then, and the condition of?
They were going to amend that, yes.
Yes.
Yes. So then the public hearing would address the adjustment and the preliminary site plan at that time in July.
Well, there would be.
The public hearing for the zoning text amendment is totally in a vacuum. It will not, it can be in the same meeting as the public hearing for your application, but we are not going to consider your application at the same time as the zoning text amendment. So we're going to do a public hearing for the zoning text amendment, hear the public, make a decision on it. Next agenda item may be a public hearing for yours, we have other stuff too, so, yeah.
Okay.
We would have, if they're in the same meeting, there would be 2 public hearings.
Okay. Then this way, once we know how that's gonna proceed, and then we'll say either just do phase 1, that's it, based on that decision, or we'll do the whole thing.
We're going to end up showing, I want to show a preliminary plan of the whole thing kind of same time. And then at that point, we can on phase 1, if they haven't.
Yeah. A personal thing I generally like is preliminary plan for the whole thing, and then final site plan for
Each phase.
each phase.
That seems like a
Yeah.
pretty elegant way to do it.
There are some things that will cross over, like the infrastructure, like the sanitary sewer along the north line, that's all in phase 1, but you're gonna have to make sure that it's sized and prepared so it can accept from phase 2.
Phase 2, correct. Okay. So there will be some, we'll have to bore through the lake and get a manhole built on the other side of that peninsula. Again, won't be the trick. And that will be done in phase 1.
So mainly these lots, if they're buildable or not, you sure that whether anything else that you want us, to prepare?
I'm sorry, what was the?
So just basically, just find out of these, I guess, 14.
There's, 10, 12 lots here.
Okay, so besides those, is there anything else that's pressing now for us to prepare for the preliminary?
Well, probably start looking at your, the lots in the parallel plan, and then ways you're gonna achieve the density bonus, and look at what the maximum density bonus could potentially be, and,
Yeah.
compare
So-
that to your.
It is a maximum of 15, even though we got 4 categories? Is that, it is?
Yep. Yep. And so,
Because, we're just reading right off the zoning ordinance, it's not.
yep, and so for members of the public, and as a refresher here, there are certain categories where you can get additional lots, and it can be up to a 5% increase from the parallel plan, depending on how much this body thinks you nailed that category. If you absolutely nailed it, you get 5. If you half nailed it, 2.5. So you could get from just 3 if you really nail them, or you could get from 4 or 5 if you partially get them.
Yeah, so a combined total of 15.
Yep.
Okay,
Okay.
very good. Thank you. We have a question.
I do, I just wondered if they've talked to Eagle and that you're comfortable, I think when this comes to public hearing, people are gonna ask questions about the stormwater, goes into Denton Creek, which eventually goes into Runyon Lake. How is that gonna be dealt with, and is Eagle comfortable with that? Along with, are you doing the open land, like, because you said you looked at it from an FR, not the RE standpoint, does it cover the open land requirements? not counting the water as open land, or are we making an exception on that? Because that's also something. I mean, you guys just updated that in 2019, not even, a full year and a half ago. And so it was important enough to reiterate in detail the fact that water doesn't count in open land. So I didn't hear him say that this all works for RE as well. We know it didn't work for FR, but when it comes time for the public hearing and the people, if you've got those aspects covered, we're gonna feel more comfortable with this, as well as does it cover the open land or the open space and all of those other key requirements under RE versus FR, right?
Well, Eagle permitting will be absolutely required for this project.
Right, but doesn't it kind of seem like it's backwards then? I mean, I would feel more comfortable, because obviously I'm gonna be there. I would feel, and chat with people, right? I would feel more comfortable if I knew you guys were covered there, that Eagle was completely comfortable. I mean, it's not that big a deal for you guys to run that by them.
Actually, we submit final plans to them, and that's what they review. We really don't submit preliminary plans to them.
No, I know, but you could chat with them.
We have chatted with them. They've actually come and verified our wetlands. So we have chatted with them. We have told them, we haven't given them a layout or anything yet.
Okay.
But when we had them flagged, they actually came out with an assessment, and they fought over a couple things, but this is kind of what we ended up with. So we have been in touch about a year and a half, 2 years ago was the last time that we kind of touched base with them. It's been that long since kind of we've gotten to this point. But when they came out and assessed it, they actually, we told them that we were doing a subdivision back here.
Right, and they were comfortable with the way the stormwater is gonna go. And
we talked about things again, they want to see it on paper as well.
Right,
So, but
okay.
yes,
So-
they want us to clean our water through their system. It keeps their wetlands charged. Kind of take the rainwater, and we got ditches, so it'll be ran through ditches. It will be sediment traps. It will run through their wetlands before it even hits the lake. So there are several things that we are going to do to kind of use the
So I think
environment.
that's important to say when it comes
Okay.
time, is what I'm saying,
Yeah, okay.
because that's one of the things people are concerned about,
Okay.
certainly.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned last time, and we'll probably continue to mention the traffic flow, because I know some of the other rules that we have, because I was gonna bring up this inconsistency, which is why I had all the mapping, but I'm happy Zach did.
Yeah, I even came with the sound effect for inconsistencies.
Yeah. So the other thing is the traffic and how some of the rules of these PUDs on how they have to do feeder, they have to be in the proper kind of road.
Deceleration, acceleration lanes, bypass lanes, all that too.
So, or on a feeder road versus a little rural road, and I think Runyon Lake versus White Lake is different. I just saying that's gonna be something people are gonna be concerned about, so you have to have your ducks in a row when you chat about that.
We have
So those
to
are the
roll
big-
commission as far as
but-
the entrance off of. Yeah.
Is it meeting the open space rules, or are we compromising on those by how much? What percent are we compromising on the open space rules?
Yeah, we're actually short, what was it, 2.5 acres on the upland.
I'm just saying, those, when we're talking, those are gonna be the questions that are important for people.
So, and I'll try to address some of those. I know they've been partially touched here. Land development requires lots of permits from lots of places.
Right.
I would never want to do it. I would never want to do it, and it's very, very common. One of the reasons why entitlement has been split into preliminary and final reviews is it gives time for the applicant to secure those permits after getting some promise that we have something we can do, and then coming back, so they're not running around spending thousands and thousands of dollars on permits that never come to fruition. So it's very, very common to secure a lot of those other permits either in between or even sometimes after. So there's going to be permits from Livingston County Water Resources Commission, I suspect, from the Road Commission, from the Utility Authority for the water and sewer. If we're on wells, it'd be through the Health Department for the wells. So for example, for wells, there'll generally be some sort of a capacity study. Not will every lot do this, but they'll also do test wells within it to see is there arsenic or other concerns. And that usually happens, again, in that gap.
They'll make us do 10% of the lots and do test wells for them.
Yep.
That's what they do.
The plan that was reviewed here previously or discussed at the meeting last week did have details about stormwater on it. This one doesn't, it's just the parallel plan. That was kind of the portion of the elephant we were trying to eat here. But it does have 4 bays, it has swales, and the idea is that you slow down the speed of the stormwater getting to these things. You allow opportunity for it to absorb in the dirt. You allow opportunities for all the dust from car brakes and the dust to settle out before it gets to the wetland. And actually there's a lot of folks, so you can't, I think you touched on this, you still want water to flow to the wetlands because otherwise they'll dry out. You just want it to be clean enough for the wetlands to be able to naturally filter it. And that gets more rigorous review later on, not as part of this. Open space was addressed more, again, in that previous plan, but here is just on there. And there are percentages of what amount of water in wetlands can count towards it. The township also allows an opportunity for preservation of open space off-site, or in the fancy planning terms, a non-contiguous PUD. So if it's not possible to get enough open space on the site, the township can say, you need 5 acres, you need 10 acres, you can do it somewhere else of significant value. And there are lots of ways that could happen. It could be conservation easement or something other, or just purchasing the property, including it in there. The township also has the opportunity to waive the requirement for all of the open space, looking at extenuating circumstances. My recollection is the most recent plan was a bit short by a couple of acres. It was raised in the staff report, but we haven't really discussed the potential paths on that. We're not to that part of the elephant yet.
I was just saying, if we're getting to the point of public hearing, if you've got some percentages or something like that, it helps the residents feel more comfortable with it. And I mean, obviously you're not gonna have everything nailed down, but addressing the key points for people, because it is with smaller lots than what the area is used to. And so how are we accommodating some of these things that people worry about? That's all I'm saying. It'll make it easier.
Yep.
But you don't have to do that.
Bring it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your comments and questions about this.
I just got a quick comment.
Well, I'm gonna move on just to the, I think you guys are set, right, for
Yeah.
tonight?
Yeah.
So we are at the part of our agenda where we are calling to the public, so Scott, you're still good.
I'll just comment on the,
Then you can comment on them, yep.
okay. Just make sure that nothing goes directly into the river. There's a little stream goes across the road into the Run Lake, right?
Yeah.
So they're gonna be directly, this runoff's gonna go directly into the wetland, not directly into the stream. There's a stream, just so you know.
Yeah, after the beaver dam, there's
Yeah,
a stream.
I know, but you're saying you're gonna put it into the wetlands to filter it out, that's what you want to do, that's fine. We wanna make sure it doesn't directly go into the stream.
Oh, no, we create a sediment
That's
basin
fine,
and then we
no,
run it through the
Yeah,
wetlands.
that
and
goes
then-
to the wetland.
Yeah, and the wetlands eat that stuff up, actually.
Oh, yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
All right, anybody else in the public want to talk about anything planning commission related? If not, going once,
Talking about.
More things you guys want to talk about.
is there anything
comments.
planning commission related
Oh.
not to do with this plan? Anything? Public, we're in public comment.
Well, I sent an email to all of you guys, I hopefully you got it. I think Ross actually answered mine, Heather Hamilton.
What was the name?
Heather Hamilton?
Yeah.
She,
I sent it to the planning chair at Livingston, or at Tyrone Township. So
Yeah, I
you know
forwarded
it.
on to
Okay, great. So
Ross.
we're just concerned, we wanted to talk about though, I think I knew this plan kind of for the corner, basically, or where we all are.
Can we
ask you to come up to the podium?
Oh, geez. That's why I sent the email. I was hoping one of these guys, I brought my crew with me, I was hoping one of them would say something. Because I'm not very good at this whole public speaking thing.
You're doing fine.
Well, it's just so that we could all hear, because it's a strain up
Yeah.
here to hear people in the back, because the microphones are not set up properly in the back.
Okay. I mean, really, I said everything in my email, we weren't really excited about having a wedding venue on our corner, with the noise and the traffic, already they were kind of being a concern. I spoke with Mike Dean from Township about theirs. They have the Birchview or the Mueller's one on their property. And he said that although they didn't have many formal complaints, they have heard, rumblings of people, noise complaints. And he said that the property on Silver Lake Road, it's the Stables, I don't recall the name of it now, but it was the Hagerman property.
Yeah.
They had submitted a thing to get theirs approved for a wedding venue, and they actually had them do a noise study, and they had them do it with indoor with the doors closed, indoor with them open, and then outdoor. And he said had they not withdrawn their application, then he would have, they were going to stipulate that it had to be, outdoor was only allowed to be the processional and the bridal march because of the noise at the property line. So I know there's a lot of different things. Even that property is a little bit different than ours. We're all kind of like I'm a cornfield away. It's only a few houses down. A lot of these, John's right there. I mean, he's directly across the street. It's not a boundary for at all. And just nobody really knew about it, so we kind of just caught wind of it, and so it kind of rustled us up a little bit.
Yeah. I saw Ross's response, and he's right.
Yeah, that was great.
It was
Thank you.
just, it wasn't like it wasn't like it was being snuck up. They introduced the application to us last week, and that's the pretty normal process. And
Okay.
there's still more. There's public hearings. You've heard about the public hearings.
Yeah.
So all that's still got to happen.
Okay.
And so
We weren't really sure. I mean, I just
No,
caught
sure.
this thing online and was like, wait, nobody knows anything about it.
There hasn't been any public, until last Tuesday, there hasn't been any public anything about it at all. So,
Okay.
so that's why, it's not like there's nothing nefarious or anything like
Sure.
that with the process. That's why it takes so many meetings and public hearings to get this stuff approved.
Okay.
So, there's plenty of daylight.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thanks.
Dan, I think the number one issue is the people are here, and it's their neighborhood right now. And like she said, there's another barn down the street. Joe Schmo's gonna have one. I mean, our rural areas are getting inundated with these things, and nobody wants 200 cars in their backyard next door to their neighbors. I mean, this is why we have zoning. We have a lady over here that put it in the zoning district over here by the cement plant. She's perfectly fine. That's where we want her. We don't want it in our residential areas. I think that's what they're here for. I mean, decibels don't mean nothing. I don't care if it's this much. I bought that property on my lake. I don't want to hear it. I don't hear it now. Why do I have to hear it tomorrow? I want it to stay the way it is now. In the future, that's what they're saying. I think I can't speak for them, but I mean, I'm sure you're going to hear some more. I fight for me and I fight for everybody else. So,
Thanks, guys.
As the crow flies from Lake Shannon to my house, which I'm only 2 doors down from this bar, I can hear some pretty big parties. And I don't mind, but it's that far away. This is right next door. I mean, 2 doors down, maybe 50, 100, 150 cars in this people's backyard. And not to mention, another consideration is the money that Livingston County just spent to redo Linden roads, south of center, which turns into a white mud pit when it gets wet. It's going to tear that road apart when you start running that many vehicles down that road. I mean, I moved out the country 21 years ago to move out the country. And you can shoot guns, illegal out in the township. I don't do it. I got a 15-yard pile of dirt backyard, but I don't do it because I like the quiet. I like to see the deer, like all the wild animals. We get a nice horse farm going in quiet beside us. And I don't think those people are real happy when we start having parties. And we sit on our deck and we gotta watch the party.
Thank you.
I'm John Adams. I live directly across from the Samaritans who filed for the application for special land use. And I moved out here 30 years ago to enjoy the peace, quietness of the neighborhood. And this right here is going to disrupt everything that I moved out here for, coming from the city environment. And so I'm not particularly fond of the situation here. And, I know they have, put in their description of 50 decibels at night taken at the property line. Well, they didn't identify which property line. It could be on the west end of the property, way in the back, not necessarily the one in front. And it's just, also the decibels. What is the allowable amount of noise during the daytime that's tolerable from the township that could be generated from the different types of music, whether it be rap or hip hop or, whatever. And everybody has different taste of music. And, during the summertime, okay, normally the windows are open. The operational period is from March to October. Well, geez, if it's going to be a 7-day operation, and it's like, how much am I going to tolerate noise? And the other, kind of concerns is, okay, if they're going to be catering, alcohol, or they're going to be selling alcohol at their events, what's the plan for handling rowdy crowds, disorderly people, and stuff like that? And not to mention, as they have, parties, fireworks, sparklers and stuff like that. You have open fields around there. There's a concern for field fires as well. And if I recall, the township many years ago had one that got out of hand, quite handily, and took a long time to put that up. And there are 3 other facilities, that can handle weddings and different facilities. You got the Tyrone golf course, you got Coyote Preserve, and what Scott mentioned was the Vale Royal Barn, which is just south of White Lake Road, just near the cement factory down here. And so, I'm asking that, be, not approved. And I do have, like I say, my home is directly across, from the Swanton residence, but I also have the corner parcel, which is directly across from the barn. And so, between the noise issue, I'm also concerned about the valuation of my property, whether it's going to take a hit on that as well. And currently, there are 2 homes being built over in Section 17, not far from the corner of 7 and Linden as well. And so those folks would also be subjected to noise, not to mention the increased traffic, where the end is going to be to the facility.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just had one statement, one question. So the statement, I know somebody brought up Shannon.
We need you to stand up, and, we're hard of hearing up here. I can't tell what you're even saying.
Yeah, do you mind coming up a little closer?
Sure. So somebody brought up Lake Shannon. I know they have a couple of parties out there every year, and I don't think anyone minds that. But it gets pretty loud out there, and sometimes it goes to 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. So I couldn't see having those parties 3, 4, 5 days a week. Or 7 days a week even, yes. So that's something to consider. The second thing is this process, where are we at right now with the process as far as the approval or?
Ross, do you mind?
The very, very beginning.
Okay. So what's the next step, or what are the steps that this has
So
to
we
go
could
through?
be included on additional agendas until the planning commission really feels that it's at a point where all of the necessary information is available to hold a public hearing, during which time there would be a public hearing scheduled. At that time, the planning commission would consider input from the public that, may or may not have been presented previously. At that point, if the plan, they can take action on the planning commission can. So they can make a recommendation for approval or denial to the township board. And then the township board would have the ultimate say in approval, denial, or deferral.
Okay. And has anything been submitted as of yet? Any kind of
The
plan?
application.
Yeah, the initial application. We've had.
We did discuss it at the last week's meeting.
Yeah.
We put all that online, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go to our website, go to the planning commission meetings, find last week's planning commission packet, it's all in there.
Okay. And as of right now, does it meet the master plan or zoning ordinance? The way it's-
Well, under the zoning ordinance, it would be considered a permitted special land use based on a determination made by the subcommittee based on the Vale Royal Barn, which was considered a public or private recreational facility special land use. Okay. So they're applying for the same thing in the same zoning district as the Vale Royal Barn.
Okay.
That's a different zoning district.
That was.
No, they're both RE.
I thought that 23 corridor was also in,
No, it's a residential property.
next to the cement plant?
Yeah, it's
The
already,
future land use is differently.
But the special, these permits don't
Right, they don't
take.
have-
There's no guarantee that this is going to be approved or denied at this point. Basically, it's something that, under our zoning ordinance, they are permitted to apply for, to be considered, as long as they meet the specific criteria. And in the process, the planning commission does have some discretionary control as well.
We have some, the board has control too. The board has the ultimate say.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Oh, Jeanette.
Maximum amount of noise that the township allows for a venue like that to impact the neighborhood?
So we do have a noise ordinance in our zoning ordinance. We do have specific decibels and things of that nature, which would be taken into consideration when reviewing a special land use application. The planning commission is going to have discretion when it comes to the hours of operation, the days of operation, things like noise limitations. At this point, the applicants likely would need to provide additional information on nuisance mitigation, ways to prevent excessive noise from spilling out to adjacent properties or nearby properties, to address potential traffic impacts, et cetera, any potential nuisance factors.
Because there's all different types of noises,
Right.
We have, people noises, conversations, laughing and stuff like that. Then you have the music, type of noises. There's times when you have cars going down the road, and it's like, my God, you can hear the thumping coming into the house there, where they say, geez, that car's gonna fall apart, those are gonna pop out. And so those are the type of things that, you have to be concerned about.
Well, there is also an ordinance regarding light pollution too, for out in the rural area. So, again, that we're still in the very beginning of the process yet.
And all those ordinances exist to protect landowners and neighborhoods. And so this is where they'll come in, that's where they'll come into play, to make sure that none of that will be violated.
And I know that, we're in a, time frame said that, 50 decibels at nighttime. Well, definition, what is considered nighttime?
It's got
I'm sure that's spelled out.
That's a broad range.
Our zoning ordinance
Some
does.
people-
It's spelled out in the ordinance.
Yeah. Nighttime officially is 45 minutes after sunset.
Yeah, but why should you have, if you're in a residential area, like I said, you're in an area where it's peaceful all the time. They move that in, it doesn't matter what the decibels are. You never had it before. You never had all the traffic and noise. It's annoyance. But anyway, I got a question for Zach. How do we get this in the future? Everybody has a barn, wants to have a wedding venue. What kind of wording do we put in here so we can keep stopping this stuff? Because we want to have our residential areas residential.
Well, and if I may, how many people, is this your first time attending a planning commission meeting? Not you for sure, I've seen your face there. So I'm going to frame it a little bit and talk some of the stuff. So within zoning districts, there are permitted uses and special land uses. And permitted uses are what you can do by right. The community has determined that it's not going to cause significant harm to the surrounding properties or the area. Special land uses are permitted, but because of their nature, there's a greater potential for impact. So instead of kind of just an administrative review, there are public hearings and there's a process. And part of that is this body and the township board ultimately can put more conditions on special land uses. So the township ordinance already has language for what sound you can export. And it's for anybody. A residential neighbor can export the same amount of sound as an event barn can. But as part of the special land use, there can be even greater limitations. So it can say everybody else gets to be loud until 10, you have to shut the thing off at 9. Or you have to tell us how you're going to manage the sound. Are you going to have folks walking around with the apps on here? Or you can only have outdoor music in these areas because the barn's going to buffer it. I'll still on this one, I haven't forgotten your question, I'm going to circle back to it. But so, I've worked with Mr. Baltman, who is doing the plan in a different community where they did an event barn. My observations of his working is that he's thoughtful and listens. So I'd recommend contacting them outside of this room and addressing your concerns so that they can start to change it. This is very, very early on in the process. It's basically kind of a feeler to get input before they spend a bunch of money. So there's a long way from here to the finish line. The question of how do you stop this in the future? Well, and I'll back up one more. If you do want to oppose it, you haven't been able to talk through differences and you're not satisfied, look to the criteria for special land uses. And look at those, look where it doesn't meet, look at the criteria for this. And I would also recommend, if you're concerned with land value, talk to a real estate person or an appraiser so you can actually show what your concerns are, that this is going to affect my house $50,000 or $1,000. The township has determined that it wants to allow these if it's managed in a way that doesn't create negative impacts. Some communities don't. Some communities have varying levels. So when I was in Dexter Township, I worked with Mr. Boltman. The community there said, you got to have a really big parcel and it has to be on a paved street. That's it, because they were concerned about traffic on dirt roads. So one potential too could be from these experiences is you can tweak your standards a bit more to address some of the concerns. You can have minimum lot area. It's hard for barns to set them back farther because it's tricky to move them without them falling down, and taking them apart is really expensive. So the question of if you wanted to stop these in the future, is it a required text amendment to say they're no longer a special land use in the areas where you don't want them to be?
Gentlemen, you hear that? I heard talking, I heard what he said. I don't know if you knew or not.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yep.
We've
And
been through it.
I will say the recent trend has been to allow what's kind of broadly called agribusiness, and ways to maintain the rural nature of certain areas, so allowing farmers to have U-picks, which generates more traffic, or having farm mazes or pumpkin patches or outdoor concerts or festivals or farm markets, with the understanding that we would rather have those impacts than have it chunked up for a bunch of lots and take away that.
I just want to stop you on agribusiness. Don't they have to show over 50% income coming out of agriculture? And there's no agriculture.
Yeah, that was a very, very broad.
There's no agriculture there.
But that's why a lot of communities have allowed for event barns. Is because it's seen as a potential extra revenue, so the farmers, not in this case necessarily, but generally that you allow larger properties to remain larger properties instead of splitting. But where that edge goes of what's acceptable and not acceptable is different from community to community and even by time in the same community.
Jeanette Ropetta. I just want to say that I don't think anybody's against event barns or this type of business. It's just having them everywhere, and so many of them. Do we really need another one also? And especially if it's going to infringe on their rights as property owners. So I think that that's something important. It is interesting though how we hear about these things. Nobody hears about it, and so that is a problem. That for whatever reason, people feel like they're not hearing about it in time. That the method that they hear it online or whatever, it's like, why didn't we know? But that's beside the point. What I stood up to ask tonight or speak about is the M2 zoning that was associated with the asphalt plant. There were 3 proposals, 2 of them.
2 of them were rezoning. We have not heard anything from the applicant on that.
I didn't suspect you have, but my question to you guys 2 months ago or more was, what are you going to do about that? Are you going to let it linger forever? Will there be a decision? Do you contact them to tell them, make a decision, completely withdraw it, or what are you going to do? The answer to me was, we should know by next meeting. I asked the next meeting, and I was told we should know by next meeting. Then I asked again, and I'm not the only one who has asked, and it also came out last night in the planning, or I'm sorry, at the board meeting. So do you have any answer on that?
I stopped saying you'll find out by next meeting
Because you're not
I don't
going
think
to?
you will. But, I mean, we don't have a process to hold their feet to the fire and make them withdraw an application. And we can put pressure on them, but they have to answer the phone and respond to emails and stuff like that.
So have there been emails or has there been phone calls made to them?
We've reached out.
There have been some general inquiries early on how long do you think you might need in order to make a decision as far as direction. Actually, just today, the supervisor did say that he was going to talk to the officers about cutting it off. Saying now has been a reasonable time. So there is a potential that that may happen very soon.
Okay.
We are at least likely going to, well, we'll have to probably consult with legal to verify, just because of how our ordinance is written, within a reasonable time to verify that we're not going to be getting any issues because of it. But that's the mindset right now, is the officers, at least my understanding is, have believed they have had enough time.
That might be something we adjust in the zoning, in the
Yeah,
ordinance.
that's definitely.
I mean, you learn stuff as you go along, and that would be one. If you withdraw, it's withdrawn for a year, like it is if it said no.
Yeah. And one of the issues really is, there's people in the area that are still looking at it and going, is this going to come through or not?
Right.
Is this going to affect our property values? Do we try and sell now and get out before something like this comes in? Or do we just hold out and pray that this doesn't happen? So I think it's owed to the residents to make a decision on this, to either tell them, these guys to withdraw their application, or bring it up again and we'll go through the whole thing again like we did with the asphalt plant. So I'll check back with you and see what.
Well, hopefully we hear from.
Yeah, you could just contact me and I'd be happy to share.
Well, is it Mike's decision, Mike Cunningham? that-
Well, right now, so there's the ambiguous language in the ordinance of reasonable time.
Okay.
That's where if somebody makes a decision, there's always a potential for a liability there.
So the lawyer will.
Yeah, as long as I believe legal thinks that they're okay with it, that's likely the path that they'll proceed on.
Thank you, I'll check that, thanks.
All right.
I move we adjourn.
We have a motion to support. All right. All in favor?
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you. This is the